So our first speaker today is Diego de la Sotta. He is a global enterprise sales director for Parsable, who drives business development and expansion strategy for Latin America, while he also manages the day-to-day relationship with selected global accounts. Diego has nearly 2 decades of experience in technology, sales, and marketing, always passionate about enabling people and businesses to rise and realize the potential, leveraging the power of technology. And Alex, if you can just quickly share about yourself, and we're good to go.
Sure. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, depending on where you are. My name is Alex Melton. I'm a senior value consultant with Parsable. I've been working in the connected work space for about 3 years now, advising and collaborated with oil and gas manufacturing customers of ours to kind of digitalize their connected worker or their workforce. Prior to Parsable, I spent 12 years in the U.S. military, where we kind of saw a lot of similar things that we see in oil and gas and manufacturing space in terms of a trend towards digitalization and implementing digital strategies in kind of your difficult and austere environments. So I take with that kind of a lot of perspective and how we drive forth applying this into the oil and gas space.
Thank you, Alex. Actually, Perspective is one of our key accounts, so we work with them quite extensively on a lot of initiatives.
All right. Okay, so we will go ahead and get started. For anybody on the line, feel free to if you have any questions, I'm open to that as being a conversation. Certainly from what Diego and I can talk about here is from our perspective, and our background in this space. But so if you have any questions, comments, or ideas of yourself, please feel free to bring that up. We can keep this an open dialogue as well. Okay, so a little bit just about, again, our perspective from where Diego and I come from. I want to talk a little bit about what it is that Parsable is and what we do, because then it kind of helps drive, the conversation and our experience. So Parsable is a Silicon Valley-based software company that we apply software for. We call it deskless workforce, or create connected workers. And essentially, in a nutshell here, right, we have turning paper procedures, paper processes that you have all throughout your organizations, right? Whether it's safety, quality, production, operations, field-based work, plant-based work, taking all of those processes and putting them into a digital construct that can be followed along and executed to leverage for collaboration, training, creating your content, your process and procedures, and collecting all that information, analyzing it, and actually driving improvements and driving understanding. So the footprint that we work on here is, and this is going to really be important in our conversation today when we talk about things at scale, because really that's going to be an important aspect of this. And so Parsable, we work in a global footprint, so we've 135 countries. We have over 44,000 users. I think this might be up close to 50 or 60 at this point. And we work in kind of a wide variety of areas. You see here consumer packaged goods, the auto industry, agriculture, paper and packaging, as well as oil and gas. Oil and gas has been where we started it from. That was the basis of where we as a company had a genesis in. But what's similar about all those different types of groups, and kind of see here some examples of some of our customer base, which is again very kind of widespread. What's similar about all these different groups, they're different industries that you have what we call like the deskless workforce. Right? People are working away from the desk. This is it's going to be that kind of blue collar work. It's not something that's you work in an office all day long. And really, there's a lot of similarities and trends that we see across these industries and how they operate. Just with that kind of very simple construct of I'm working with my hands. I'm in difficult environments, either in the middle of nowhere or at facilities, and that drives for certain requirements and needs for your workforce, kind of regardless of the actual output of your industry. Okay, so that's a little bit about the background of Parsable.
So a quick question on this one. So
yes.
So when we talk about a lot of companies and a lot of questions, right? Obviously, that being able to provide your workforce tools that make it easier and make it better for them, as you said, for these blue collar workers, is definitely something that that is sellable and drivable. But what about from the sort of like company perspective? What do you think is the biggest driver from sort of like the bottom line / expenses revenue? What do you think the biggest driver for adopting those technologies on the company level, not on the personal and sort of like well-being standpoint?
Yeah. So I got 2 slides away, and I'm gonna answer that question.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
So some things we want to talk about today is really kind of what is a connected workforce and what problems is it trying to solve, right? So, and that's kind of getting, I think, to the answer to your question there, right? What drives us? What's going to be advantageous for a company to do this, and why is this going to be the direction? And then from there, we'll then talk about some strategies in terms of how to actually pursue and to think about, implementing a kind of connected worker into your process. So it's going to get a little bit into, I think, answering your question here, which is going to be, what are some of the trends that we're currently seeing and challenges that are happening? And this, I've seen this kind of a wide variety, and I'm sure a lot of you, maybe from your perspective or vantage point, have seen this as well. We talk about the aging workforce, right? And this is, we've seen it both in oil and gas, as well as manufacturing, where you've got a large quantity of individuals who have been working in an industry for 25 years, 30 years, and they have a lot of resident knowledge, a lot of knowledge they've built over the time, and they're getting ready to retire. And it's not going to be handed off to someone who's 2 years behind them. It's going to be handed off to someone who is newly hired, who's 20 years old and has no experience. And then the individuals are retiring, they're going to take with them all of their resident knowledge and expertise. So it's going to be a big area there in terms of kind of a challenge, right? So how do we recruit, train, and retain people to address this gap? So in particular, when you think about the people who are replacing the aging workforce, it's not being those younger groups. We want to train, we want to retain and incentivize them to come work based off of their expertise and knowledge. So dynamic operations is going to be another one, right? Things are going to be changing kind of constantly, that we need to be able to make sure that we're capturing, that we have visibility and understanding into. And then, some of these may not apply with how it's called digital natives. So this is going to be, again, the concept of the people that you're going to be, people that you're going to be hiring on. They, again, the younger workforce, they've grown up with technology. They understand it. That's really just a part of, an extension of everybody's life. And even for those of us who didn't start off that way in life, it has become that, I think for most people. But certainly from the perspective of a younger, so from the younger generation, that's always been a part of it. That's always been an important aspect of it. And yet when they get to work, it's cut off, right? There's no use of that. It's back to paper. It's back to older processes. And then with that is that digitalization kind of needs. So, and that really comes into, we need to be able to take and essentially, download the knowledge and information of that aging workforce and retain that and have that to where you can now build sustainable, repeatable processes. And really do that through that digitalization kind of effort, because that's what's going to allow you to, to implement those things at scale for new groups. So a couple, points here of, 67% of the industrial companies have connected worker initiatives underway. This is showing that, this is a trend that's been coming. Everybody, I think, has a goal or has recognized the fact that we need to digitize, we need to advance and move the ball forward, and that's the place to go in order to achieve more, greater value, to run more lean, to be able to share knowledge and collaborate. 85% of manufacturing executives globally believe connected worker will be commonplace in their plants. So again, whether it's manufacturing, oil and gas manufacturing, field work, this is something that I think everybody is kind of seeing a direction toward. We know it's happening, we know it's important, and there's been a lot of investment put into it. But then the question kind of comes, okay, well, what do we want to do? What's our goal, in doing this? It's one thing to say we need it. It's another thing to say specifically what do we need and how do we go about achieving that? Okay, so a little bit, again, background perspective, evolution, we call it deskless workforce, right? So if you think about your workforce, you have the content of, the first thing you got to do is train them. They need to train and understand how they're going to execute their work before they can then move on and continue to operate. And so obviously in the past, when we talk about kind of digitalization, back in the late 90s, you started seeing, okay, e-learning, we call this kind of blended approach, right? Where we can say, okay, let's have course catalogs, online training, self-study, basic kind of, online learning kind of was at its infancy. From there, you then, in kind of the mid 2000s, you started getting a little bit more advanced in terms of being more customized. And saying, okay, how do we manage a path, a track for our people to learn, to understand? So it's, learning, on the job learning, and kind of trying to hone in and refine and advance the people through some sort of a track within your organization, right? And that's requires a lot of on the job, as well as some, some specific training courses that you might do. 2010, we really kind of stepped up to that more continuous learning, which is going to be a lot more, online based content learning on, learning on demand, that kind of approach, which I think we've all seen. And now we're getting into, it's kind of this new age here, which is again, where we say we're currently at, which is this called micro learning. How do we actually have information at our fingertips? We have information at our fingertips at all times. We want to be able to continuously learn, continuously drive better expertise and knowledge and growth. And again, this is from that kind of worker perspective, right? So where are people doing that? Learning management systems can almost be invisible to people, right? You're not necessarily logging on and saying I have to go do a course. It can be around your facility, around your plant, having things to track and remind you on how to do your work. And then from there, what we're still kind of going on to is really learning, in flow of work. So it comes about, hey, how do we get people on the job working as quickly as possible, right? This isn't about we need to have a 2-week training period and there's probably a 6-month time where they are, really learning how to do their job. It's, we want to be able to say, hey, we've standardized, we know the process, it's written out, it's completed, and we can get it in there and, as close to day one as possible. As they're working, as they're executing, they can have constant reminders, constant push of how to do the work, how to execute. And then also, again, tracking that information as well. So you truly understand what it is that they did, because they are, again, learning in flow of work. You want to make sure you're tracking that they're executing work properly. Okay. So kind of in a nutshell, I want to talk a little bit about, what exactly is connected work. Before we go any further, I think it's important to kind of, talk about the actual, definitions here. So as we mentioned before, right, with new technology that we have coming along, we have this ability to have kind of immediate access to information, people, right? And we see this in our everyday lives when most of us, I'm assuming everybody here on a call probably has a smartphone, or if you don't, you're probably near one anyways. And so this concept of having all this information at our fingertips to communicate, to talk, to collaborate, is all around us. We use it in our everyday lives. And typically when we get to work, particularly again, when we talk about deskless workforce, it stops. And so having that connected worker is really bringing in all of those things that we, all the advantages that we do have from kind of a connected life, and applying that into our workforce. So really saying, okay, having digitally connected people so that they can, through information and systems and machines, collaborate and work together. And so we talk about this from a human to human perspective, but also from a human to machine and machine to human perspective, right? So rather than having, just me maybe talking and communicating to my boss, I can also see very quickly and easily, based on the work that I'm doing, can update and push requirements to what a machine needs to do, and then vice versa. I think a lot of people, when they think about digitalization and Internet of Things, we tend to think of it always about this concept of removing people out of these spaces and replacing them with machines, replacing them with robots. And while certainly there is an aspect of that can go on, the reality is no matter how advanced we get with our technology, with robots, we're able to push that envelope. The concept of people making decisions, critical thinking, choosing what needs to happen and executing that, there's always going to have to be a person involved in that process. And so we want to make sure that they are connected as well, so that we don't have a gap or a blind spot. We call it kind of a digital blind spot around where people are working in the ecosystem of all this other connected content or connected machines. So now we can take people, connect them to the machines, connect them to other people within your organization, and now you're having kind of a fully well-rounded digitalization effort that can kind of run as leanly as possible and essentially take a lot of the advantages that you have from the tracking that you get with with machines and robots, and almost applying that to humans, right? You have up-to-date knowledge, up-to-date information on what they're doing, for tracking trends, improvement.
So Alex, a quick question here, right? So,
Yes.
so that sort of connectivity, and maybe again you answered later in your presentation, but how do you actually ensure that you in fact connected, right? Because let's say someone is working somewhere in the middle of Alaska and they need to speak to someone who's working, I don't know, in the middle of Russia, right? And it's obviously the physical length of the wire becomes important, the general connectivity, the remoteness of the location could play a role, and then you also have devices maybe throughout the world and all of this. How do you actually make sure that people are in fact connected when the connectivity could be an issue just because of the geographical reasons?
Yeah, very good question. I think the strategy that you want to have for connected work needs to be two things. One, it needs to be set up for what do we need to solve? What can we possibly do today with our infrastructure, with our connectivity requirements? And then the other part of that is going to be what we do today, we want to make sure it can also bend and flow into what we want to do tomorrow, right? And so I spent a lot of time out on oil rigs, working with Shell, with Halliburton, Schlumberger, out there in the very limited to sometimes no connectivity environments. And so when you're out there, so for example, I worked with Shell out in the kind of Permian area in Texas, and this was middle of nowhere with almost no connectivity. And so when they first started this initiative, they said, okay, we want to be able to work in a way where we don't have any sort of connectivity at all. And that's what they started with. So the focus of what they did is for a connected worker is to say, hey, we need to be able to digitally track and understand what they're doing, even when there is no connectivity. Okay, so that's saying, okay, well, can we have, so for example, for Parsable, right, we can, all the desk work that can be done is executed on a phone, and that phone can work in offline. But that phone is also tracking, the phone or tablet is also tracking the times that things were happening, right, all the answers that they're inputting in for the process that they're doing. And then when they do get connectivity, which could be at the end of the day when they go back to their, to their home or to their, the camps that they're staying in, that then uploads to, cloud, and that is now what is disseminated, throughout the organization. So that's more of a collaboration and connecting work, not necessarily in real time, but in a more broader scale, right? And then what Shell did was say, okay, well, we have that, but we know our goal is that we need to have improved connectivity out on the well sites. And so they started making efforts to have greater and greater connectivity out there, to where now most of their well sites, they can, again, that are using Parsable, they have trailers, they already had trailers out there, but the trailers now have better connectivity. And so while they walk around the well, which is maybe, 200 yards away, they're not gonna have connectivity right up there, but if they go back to the trailer, they can connect. So they're only ever maybe, 30 seconds away from having that connectivity. So I think, I think the goal would be to set up as much connectivity as you can within the reality and the restrictions of your actual, real internet connectivity. But know that if you don't have any, you still want to make sure that you're having a track record. You have data that's being collected, data that can be used, that when you do have connectivity, you can, you can utilize it. So you may lose on the real-time collaboration, but you're still gaining on tracking, on, visualization, understanding and tracking of the work that's being done. Maybe it's, 5 hours ago, but that's still better than a piece of paper that someone did and they wrote it down, and now they're going to go, mail it in or scan it, email it, and they go sit in someone's email, and they have to then put it in a filing cabinet or upload it somewhere.
So technically speaking, that pretty much there are different ways of what would be considered connected work, right? So one times you're trying to say something like immediate access, but sometimes you're looking more of the sort of the best effort, right? It's best effort both on to produce the data and where they are, what they do, but then also I assume that also works for accessing some data. You can kind of upload the data to their phones or to their tablet, and then you can go and find this information sort of in the online fashion as well. Correct?
Yeah. Your goal should be able to be, particularly for, for like right now, to be able to work in offline, right? So we should be able to still push information, to the worker at certain increments, right? So for example, when we work with groups on oil rigs, offshore oil rigs, the windows for connectivity were much smaller, right? So there was always a kind of a setup sync of say, hey, at 8 a.m. every day, this is the sync time. We have the satellite access, and we're going to go sync all the jobs and all the content that we need. Now I can go work offline for the next 24 hours, within the mobile devices or, that you're working on. You can now collect, track, report, and then, and then at 8 a.m. the next day, you're now pushing that data and then collecting, and then pulling in the data that you need for the next day.
Alex, if I can add something, if
Sure.
you think from the current context and like 99% of the companies that we meet, all the work right now is mostly being done disconnected. Okay, so the person leaves in the morning with a set of instructions of the work that they need to do. They take their bag of tools, do maintenance, do safety routes, do visual inspection, fill out papers, fill out different checklists, different forms. If they found a problem, they might call on the phone, they might use a radio, they might even use WhatsApp. Everything is kind of disconnected, or the tools are not talking to each other, and all that information is getting lost in the process. So when we're talking about connected work, is that we are talking about one single pane of glass where all the information that deskless workers are seeing every day is in one place. So you start connecting system, machines, management, SMEs, everything for the person that is executing the work during the day has the information right there at the finger of his, at the tip of his fingers, right? So that's where we're talking about connected worker. It's not that right now the expectation. So for example, we see many projects right now in terms of VR or augmented reality, right? But when companies try to implement that, they see that usually they're so far behind in terms of just defining what the people need to do every day in their jobs to do their jobs right when they need to, especially when they're working on remote locations. We have a customer, so you mentioned Alaska and Russia, right? In my neck of the woods, is Patagonia, and that's the problem that they have. Every morning they woke up, they go to work, drive 4 hours, check the different wells in Patagonia, and they wouldn't talk to anyone until 8 p.m. that day. And when they came back, they had to go to the computer, start filling information, and you had a huge delay on everything that person was doing, right? So now with connected work, is whenever they execute the information in a digital or mobile device, whenever they get access to internet, it can be in a gas station or anywhere, the device is going to connect. And that's where you started bringing people together and systems and the company and management.
No, that makes sense. I think it is also extremely important given all the tools that you can have on those wells, right? That you have sort of like a one hub to get this information.
Right.
But maybe the follow-up question to it is that if we rely so much on the mobile devices, what about the robustness of those devices? What about, again, if you work in Alaska, if you work in Russia, you work in, I don't know, in sand dunes somewhere like this, you kind of need to make sure that your phone is actually working and not just turning off because of the extreme weather conditions. So how do you address this? How do you address that fact that if you make your workers rely almost exclusively on your digital devices, how do you ensure that those digital devices actually do stay connected?
Yeah, I can speak to that a little bit. So first of all, I'll say that I think the reality of how that actually plays out is maybe different than a lot of people's fear on it. And so, so for some perspective here too, right? Prior to Parsable, I was in the military for 12 years, and we had a lot of these same fears, right? We started bringing a lot more digital devices out that we really were reliant on, in order to operate. There's always a question of, well, because we use, commercial off-the-shelf tablets, right? We use regular computers, and this question of like, hey, what happens if this breaks? What happens if this is, a problem? And I think the reality is that the connected work that you're doing is the work that you're executing is a layer of advancement on top of what you're already doing, right? So if you think about having a piece of paper that you're tracking the work, when you're not connected, what are you doing? Well, either you don't know how to do the work already, or you are, or you're referencing documents, referencing information. So all the same things here can happen to where if you want to have a device that's connected, that works, that has information on it, that's great. When you don't have it, then what you need to accomplish with that is what is your backup plan? What, primary, alternate, and tertiary plans, I think are always going to be important and necessary. And those can also be digital backups as well, right? So this idea that, okay, my device is broken and therefore I can't work, It doesn't mean that digital has lost. Now we need to go back to something else. It's, well, what's the backup that we have? What's another device that we have that's on hand? I think that's the way to kind of play that, because you're never really, I would be hard pressed to find a situation where you're at a point where just that, because of where you're at, the environment that you're in, that digital won't work, right? Maybe a specific tablet or a specific device doesn't work. So then you do want to have backup plans, kind of in place. But that's more of a management of your people and requirements and expectations. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And I think it's really important to again, us as managers, we're trying to manage risk, but sometimes we tend to, overestimate the possible risk.
Yeah, like I said, I've never once had a customer that's ever had, hey, we went out there and just the device couldn't hold up, right? It couldn't happen. It's like, well, the devices out there today, again, it's almost the same problem that you have here in the real world with your devices going to use, in your free time. All right, well, you can buy a better case, buy a more rugged case. There are more ruggedized devices that you can purchase. So I think, just incorporating that kind of capability into it is important. And then there's also just going to be the baseline of like oil and gas, which is, hey, I need to have certain requirements for, class 1 div 2, needs for at my well sites. So there are cases that can allow for that, that you can do for tablets. And there's also even pushing the envelope there. So Shell's another great example of this, where because we work with Shell at the well site engineers. So the company men out on the rigs. The rule used to always be, right, there was no devices allowed out there. It wasn't allowed because of, again, there was this concern of that basically the rig was going to blow up, static electricity requirements. And so now we are able to, what they did is they pushed and they said, hey, the real problem is that, or it's not really as big of a problem. There's 2 areas when we're perfing that we don't want to have a device, but other than that, we can have a device out there. And they kind of redid their assessments and figured, hey, we can have devices out on the rigs. We want to be careful and cautious, but really the fear was greater than the reality.
Perfect. Thanks so much for sharing that. I think it's really useful.
Okay, so we talk about connected work in terms of quickly improving operations, productivity, quality, and safety. So I think companies, again, we talk about this challenging of how do we improve all these areas. So, non-digital environments have kind of very static paper-based instructions, right? That they can be outdated, they can be slow, and this really causes, problems with, again, real-time visibility. That there's a very small group that actually have a tracking and understand what's going on. There's high level of variability, right? That's going to happen in your work. Hey, an event occurs, and now we need to adjust course. And so how does the paper can't really mold to that, right? Unless someone actually actively knows where to go get, download, and bring it with. So that variability creates a lot of problems. And then a lot of, workforces don't have any sort of formal training in the workplace, right? It's a lot of it's a lot of on the job type of style of training. And so to be able to have, again, like a third of these workforce doesn't have it. That's a massive area where problems occur, right? We're working with, again, another industry, but if there's a safety problem or something that doesn't occur, they get fined heavily by it. Everything slows down, everything comes to a stop, and even worse so, they actually have where their facility completely can break because people aren't checking equipment right. They're not checking on the right thing or making sure the right thing is in place. And then really this comes down to knowledge, right? It's not usually about someone being inept or someone actively doing something they shouldn't be doing and they knew it. It's more about they didn't know. And so that has really, large lasting implications, I think, for organizations and their ability to operate, right, safely, in a quality way and productive. All right, so we kind of hit ahead on this. We'll skip past this here a little bit, but again, so why invest in this, right? This really comes back to how can we improve, compliance, safety perspective, pushing information to your workforce, capturing that information when they are done with it. How do people collaborate and interact, while they are actively working, and then really drive efficiencies that you can gain based off of that transparency that you're now getting, that understanding of the work that's being executed, because it's real time and you can get a lot more information than you would have before. Any questions on this before we move on?
I think that again, just again, you might be saying this, but what do you think is the biggest driver from the company perspective when they're thinking about this connected work? So in terms of again like revenue and expenses and all this, what do you think is that like all of those things people understand, and all those people saying yes, we want to do this, but how do you think it affects their bottom line, and how do you think they start thinking about saying yes, we do need connected work, yes, we do need to invest in those technologies, yes, we need to invest in all of those devices and everything?
Yeah.
So let me
or go ahead.
let me take that one for a little bit, Alex.
Okay.
So if you think about the oil and gas industry, and I only have the numbers for the US, right? But in the last 20 years, $40 billion in $40 billions in dollars in environmental offenses, safety-related offenses, compliance offenses, right? And it's not, I'm not just thinking about the legal part or the fines that the government put in the companies. It's the impact that this company had in the environment, in their workers, in safety. And usually because all these problems happens because it's someone or the company didn't have clear rules, didn't have clear operating procedures, that people, someone skipped the procedure, someone missed a step, and that when that happened, the person was isolated, was not communicated, and the company was slow to react to that. So if you take those two elements, that the lack of training, the lack of operating procedures, operating procedures that are being executed in paper, plus a disconnected environment where the company has little or no visibility to what workers are doing on day to day, that's the perfect recipe for disaster, right? And that's where we see, like, if you remember the news, everybody here probably in the call can remember what happened 10 years ago with the big explosions, and what happened with BP, right? All those things happen because someone is skipping or was not trained well, or the SOPs that were developed, they were not addressing the different things that people should do on the day-to-day. So if we take it to a lower scale, right? If we think about a factory, and we see one of the biggest ways for the factory is rework, okay? Quality problems. They're building something, they're manufacturing a product, and they have huge amount of waste coming out of the factory that affects the environment, but also affects the bottom line. And why you have that waste is because the operating procedures that are defined for that work to be done right, correctly every day, is not being followed by the workers because of lack of training, or because management or the factory is not making sure that people are following those SOPs. So that's how you start tying out this disconnected worker environment to making sure that the big problems or the small problems in some cases are not happening, right? And those are the ones that affect the bottom line of the company. Make sense? That help, or you want some other example? Alex can expand on that too.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is just think about the amount of, it's particularly in oil and gas, the amount of time, money, and resources you spend on making sure people are executing something in a certain way and validating that they did it in a certain way, right? So aside from digital trends, aside from all of that, it's third-party inspectors, right? Checking hold points on assembly of equipment. It's a well site supervisor watching and validating the work that's happening out on the well. And then all the supervision and the time from, get higher level people also that get paid much more money to have to go check on this work, right? And there's a lot of money that goes into that. I think, in the example, I think Shell spends, it was before about, $30 million a year just in a couple different groups on third-party inspections, on going to their vendors and saying, hey, did you have performed the work right? And you think about what is it that they're really trying to do? They're trying to just guarantee that something was executed in a certain way. Well, with a connected worker, for example, you could say, well, okay, we need to check that something was assembled properly. And instead of sending somebody out there, why don't I have in real time on their device as they're executing their job, they're taking pictures and videos that's all tracked, that has data associated with it that's easily filterable and managed. And so now at any point in time, you can see 100%, hey, here's how something was done. And it didn't require sending somebody out there at $150, $200 an hour to go prove that it was done. And that's then not to even talk about the savings of time, because you're not waiting on that individual, you're not coordinating those efforts, so on and so forth.
Yeah, I think it's actually really, really important to to kind of understand it. And I think it really kind of falls down in my mind that, first you have all those technologies that are working with the devices, then you have overseeing and over that, and you have pretty much every step of the way you can automate, but the people is the one portion that really needs that additional connectivity, because again, you can take sensors, you can take the people data and combine it together and actually see whether the work was done and to the extent it was done. But we have another question. So what is the backlash of using this as an HR tool for measuring performance and monitoring mode of operation of the workforce?
Yeah, and that goes into some of the. Let me throw it back up here. So that kind of goes into kind of implementation strategies, right? In terms of how is this presented, how is this understood by people, and I think the people who have the most concern is usually always the kind of question of saying, well, this is just going to be used to try to get me fired, right? Or to it's Big Brother looking over my shoulder. And I think the method with which you roll this out or roll out these strategies, and we'll talk about implementation strategies here in a little bit, is going to be extremely important, because how you present this, and also not even just the optics of it, but also the true intentions of how you want to use this, right? This isn't about this isn't about saying, hey, we want to fire you because you did something bad. It's about, hey, we want to understand what it is that how you're operating. For the older workforce, it's, hey, we want to be able to take and learn what you guys are doing, and really be able to understand this so that you're not having to be pulled left and right to other people, to watch and monitor them. This is going to allow you to do that easier and better. And to really show the outcome of what they're getting, right? If everybody feels like they're putting data into a black hole, into a void, that now you start getting this question of, well, what are they using this for? It's just HR trying to make sure I'm not, I'm doing my job. As opposed to saying, no, you have a real-time dashboard. You can visualize the work that you're doing. You can see it, pick your time out in combination with all of your other work. And now we can see, hey, here's a gap that we have. Here's a problem maybe where we have a bottleneck or a slow point. How do we get more efforts into this to make this go quicker? If the workforce is seeing essentially the fruits of their labor, that's usually what's going to be able to drive the best adoption and the best, again, talk about, transparency, right? Transparency is not just about bottom down. It's also going to be, not about top down, but also about bottom up, right? They're not going to have transparency about where this is going, what's being looked at, and what this is being used for, and how this helps, your group work better.
From the HR perspective too, there's a I would say that there's two big groups, right? And anyone that is under 35, usually the fact that the company is not operating with something like this is something that is not good. Okay, so they see that technology is necessary for the company to improve their processes, move forward, to be competitive. And on the other side, you have the baby boomers here in the US. We talk a lot about that in terms of a skills gap, but also they see that the need of technology for them to stay relevant, right? So you might have seen this maybe 20 years ago. Some change management issues in terms of like, no, we want to keep doing everything that we have done it forever, and really, it's many times when we go and talk to customers is how they're going to approach change management regarding a platform like this. But what we see every day, every week, is that people are, they want this because it makes their lives easier, as Alex explained, for all those reasons, make their lives easier. One very specific example is like, usually people, they're in their shift, they need to go to a computer, start submitting all the data that they capture that day in paper, checklist, everything, right? Now, when they do it in digital, in a connected worker platform, they can do it during the day as it happens. And at the end of the day, they have 30, 40 minutes, they can finish 30, 40 minutes earlier. So we see a lot of goodwill to try the technology. And then when they try it, they usually don't go back.
Yeah, and I also think it's important to call out too, that when we talk about connected worker, the idea should be, again, also from a bottom-up perspective, that this is a tool that's going to help them do their job, while also simultaneously getting all of the kind of high-level, top-down needs that a company wants, right? I think up until now, for the most part, software has always just been a burden on a worker, right? It's something where I have to go in and I do data entry, right? It's I have to collect these certain points because it's necessary for somebody else. But now you can literally have this stuff in line, right? Say, hey, here, I need you to assemble these two pieces right here. Here's literally how to do it. Here's a quick step on it. hey, did you have a problem with this? Yes or no? Yes. Okay, well then try these 3 things. Okay. And then at the same time, it's also capturing that data of saying, hey, okay, what torque did you apply to this? Or how did you assemble this that the top down needs? And so really it's this fluid concept of you have a tool that's helping someone actually work better while also collecting that information, for the company. And so it's not necessarily this dichotomy anymore of, well, this software is data repository and this software over here is my work instructions.
Yeah, it does make sense. It is actually one of the things that we see industry in and industry out, that the best way to adoption of new tools and new technologies in general is just to make sure that it is a win-win situation for everyone.
Yeah, and I think too, and when we talk about this, when we talk about implementations, that these types of software, connected worker, should be really led by operations, right? This doesn't need to be, or your goal should not be to have, okay, there's another IT, like an IT requirement that they're pushing this on us, right? These types of things, these are fuel, these only really work well if it's built and set up by your operations, right? Because operations are the ones who know how to perform the work, they know how to execute it. And so having a platform, having something that can be purely a tool used by an operations group is what you're going to be wanting to use and implement, right? We think about, using Word, Word, PowerPoint, all those things, right? That's software, but it's meant to be used by actual people executing, right? It's not necessarily an IT function. I mean, same thing here applies here, right? You want to have a connected worker where you're building your procedures, your processes. That's no code, right? If you have an expertise in what you're doing, you can now go take the software and execute it and implement it in the strategy, and not something that's just going to be driven by IT. And I got to go submit a request because I need to make a change to something because it doesn't work.
Okay. Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yep. And that really ties into what we're going to talk about here next, which is really this kind of stages and this process of continuous improvement. I think a lot of people think about digitalization strategy in terms of like a linear approach of we're here and we need to go get to here. And so we say, okay, well, what do we want here to look like? Okay, so they say, okay, well, here's some things we want. Let's build out an RFI and RFP. Maybe we want to build the software, implement these things. And so they start working towards that goal. And they fail to realize what happens is now you put all these efforts, all this upfront work to achieve this goal, you get it, and then you realize, hey, this isn't really working for us, right? And so now you got to set your next goal. But you may not have any sort of resources or capability to do this. And there was maybe not a goal about it. And so that's what's really important to recognize, that these efforts, digitalization is continuously happening. So the system that you set up should not be one where you have a goal and you hope that goal is the right one. Because just like how your phones can change every couple of years, right, with new technology, your guys' operations need to change that way too, to leverage new technology, to also leverage the improvements that you're going to be able to achieve based on the benefits of technology, right? The fact that you can see all this work, have all this data, digitize it, you put it into a system, you execute it, and now you can measure, right? You can collect all this information, you can see all of it, and then you can start transforming, right? Based on what you learned, let's now go and let's make efforts to transform, to make changes and keep going again. And so a lot of times we work with customers who they're not mentally kind of in that space. And then they kind of fail to realize that this should always be an ongoing process, and that, again, also an importance for this being run by operations, because IT can't continually run a project on the same exact thing, but operations can continually improve, right? They can continually build processes, iterate on those processes, and now they also need a function to be able to push that out to the workforce to execute off of.
So, quick question on that. So, how do you actually keep track of all those new technologies and what is happening in the world? Because we have so many technologies and so many opportunities popping up. So, how do you actually find those that actually work here?
Yeah, let me hop over here. I'm gonna probably jump down a couple slides here to kind of talk about strategy here. Okay, so we talk about strategy for connected worker. There's a couple things that we want to think about here, which is, okay, so where does it fit? This kind of short to say, it's going to fit everywhere, right? Anywhere you have deskless workforce, you want to be able to apply this, which means you want to do a lot of different things. And so the goal we want to try to say is, okay, well, in the same way that we think about kind of consumer products here, right? So we talk about, you initially, prior to, having a smartphone, right? You had a different, maybe something different that you own for your music. You had a camera, right? You had a the various things. You had a TV, you know, all that's on one area, right? And then it kind of starts molding and molding and molding. Now it's down where it's all the way into one device, right? So it's kind of a one-stop shop for what you're doing. So the goal should be kind of to apply the same thing here, right? Of saying, okay, well, how do we take things around, you know, safety, operation training, quality, maintenance, supply chain continuous improvements, and start molding that into, you know, one continuous process. And really that's looking at leveraging also that understanding of consumer grade applications and software, right? Because everybody knows how to use, most people know how to use a smartphone. And so the function of using Facebook, using those things is really going to, you know, Facebook or email, you want to be able to apply those same types of kind of consumer level knowledge into the work that you're executing off of. And so one of the things that what we can talk about, you know, along with this and kind of know what's, you know, what do we want to use, we want to execute from, you want to be as flexible as possible, right, with any of this. So, you know, it's hard to kind of keep up with necessarily, you know, every latest and greatest brand new trend that's out there. Certainly there are, you know, companies like McKinsey and all them that can advise and adapt people on that. But I think, you know, the goal should be there's a software goal, but there's also the iteration is also around the actual physical work that you're doing, right? So you're looking for software that's going to say, hey, even if I am static in terms of what the software does, I can still iterate and improve what my people are doing because of the insights, because of the knowledge that I'm having, right? So it doesn't always have to be an iteration or improvement of the specific technology itself, but it's iteration and improvement on the process and procedures that you're performing. Okay, because, you know, obviously we can't guarantee where things are going to go. You know, we have ideas, we have concepts of it, and we want to be open to that and flexible to it. But I think the reality we can guarantee and know today is that you can iterate and change your processes. And so you want to, you know, find solutions and tools that are going to allow you to do that and allow you to do that in an agile way, right? Rather than saying, hey, if I need to make a change, right, this is going to take me 6 months or a year to do, right? To say, hey, you know, I want to be able to make a change and I want to impact it tomorrow. But again, change around the people, change around the worker, not necessarily change around the software itself. Does that answer your question? Sort of. I know, again, it's hard to know what all the software is out there.
No, of course, yeah.
Focus on the people and the process, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really the goal, and that's where you want to see the change, as opposed to necessarily changing technology.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so we got just about 9 minutes left here.
No,
so,
we actually, if you wanted it to take longer, we have an hour and a half allocated, and we already had questions in. So gotcha. Don't worry about the speed. We're good. Right.
Yeah, sorry, I thought in the chat. Are there some questions here that?
No, it's good. I voiced all of them.
Okay, gotcha. All right, so, you know, talking about, let me back up here one more. So now I want to talk about kind of connected work at scale. And I think this is really a really important aspect of we talk about connected workforce. Is anything that we do and the mindset around this should be doing things at scale. This isn't point solutions for one group or one facility, right? Because the value of that is just going to be so much smaller. You know, as opposed to saying, hey, I can make centralized processes and controls, and I can push that out. And the more scale you do, the more value that you're going to find. Okay, so we talk about, you know, scalability. You know, so, you know, scalability of your emerging tech projects really defines whether or not your initiative is just an innovative solution to a problem or a transformative competitive advantage, right? And you get to the questions, right? Competitive advantage really is going to be the scope, the importance of all of this. And so if you just, you know, break this down kind of in a, you know, simplistic way to say, hey, if I have a facility that's assembling a tool in Houston, and I have another facility that's assembling the exact same tool in Saudi Arabia, we should expect and want them to assemble that in the exact same way, right? Because if I can control the expectations and how they're assembling it, how we're tracking they're doing, and also the knowledge share between those groups for that process improvement, because now your pool has just gotten bigger for, you know, for knowledge, right? Everybody, again, this comes back to the goal of any of this software, right? Is not to remove people from thinking. The goal is to help them in their work and to track and understand what they're doing when they are thinking about these concepts, right? So if you've got someone in Saudi Arabia who's really good and knows a quick way to assemble something, you're going to want to know and understand that and apply those practices to And then also enforce and expect that, say, hey, you know, we have a process owner and who says on this tool, here is the way that we want to do it. We took some input from Saudi Arabia and from Houston. Hey, both groups, you need to assemble in the same way. Let's track and understand the problems. Let's, you can certainly incorporate and leveraging people to voice and collaborate with each other on better ways to work. But that standardization, everybody working consistently in the same way as you expect, is really where you find that competitive advantage, is really where you operate the most kind of lean area possible. And so that really kind of goes beyond, thinking beyond the technology, right? It's really going to be about the workforce. It's the human individuals who are executing that are going to be really important when we think about this, and not about a tool that's thinking for somebody, which I think sometimes people can conflate and say, well, I want them to just kind of be, fingers on a keyboard and the tool's the one thinking. It's like, well, no. You hire people, you train them for a reason. You want their knowledge and their expertise. You want to push information to them, but you also want to collect what it is that they're doing, which sometimes may also be decision points, right? Okay, and so with that kind of comes, implementing at scale. And from our experience, the implementation can be the hardest part about all of this. This is really where we've seen the difference from the customers that we work with. The success or failure is hardly ever in the actual scope of what they're trying to do, about the actual effort to digitize, but about their method at which they implement. Is really going to be a very important critical factor in this. And so these are kind of what we've seen as critical success factors, and having these three things in place is really what you want to ensure that you're doing, and all of them have an equal kind of level of importance. And you'll notice kind of a lot of this here is not really around the tool itself, but it's going to be saying, okay, do I actually have the infrastructure in place to support this, right? So, talked about connectivity, devices, right? Do I have all these things? If you're going to go work in an area with zero connectivity, you want to make sure, right, that your platform that you're using can operate in that environment, for one, but also you're not asking them or requiring them to do things that needs real-time connectivity, because it's not a reality of what they want. So if you say, hey, we need them to be able to do things based off of real-time connectivity, then the infrastructure needs to be in place to support them with that, right? And then the other part of this is governance and change management, which really kind of ties hand in hand with each other. Governance is having the right people in place in order to affect change, in order to execute that change management. And this is probably the area. The infrastructure is, I think, a lot easier for people to grasp, because it's very much ones and zeros. If we want to do X, we need Y. But the governance and the change management is probably the biggest pitfalls that we see, with customers and their strategies. Is, again, something to say, hey, we have an IT directive, right? IT is going to control this. We're going to run this. We're going to push out and say, hey, you guys are going to execute, these things, and that's an issue, because there's no governance actually within the operations, right? You talked about, some questions of how do we get people who are, maybe hesitant or are worried about what this is, right? Usually that's a problem of not having their leadership on board, not having everybody get in track of what the goals are, right? This is not a IT mandate. This is we're working at the most granular, level to say, hey, we're going to execute this because of X, Y, and Z, and here's what we hope to achieve out of this, and then showing them those benefits, right? So to have your VP, all the way down to your managers, down to the individual user, understand the goals and what we're trying to accomplish, right? And I'm always a big fan of saying you can't over communicate. And usually the problem is everybody kind of under communicates, right? By the time you get back to the end user level, they don't know what's going on with any of this. And I've seen that firsthand, where I worked with a group who, at kind of high level, with their VP and kind of their overall operations director said, hey, yep, we're doing this. This is our goal. I said, got it, great. Went all the way out. I live in Wisconsin, flew all the way out to Malaysia, and got out there to work with that group. And we walked in the door with some of their own people from their own company, and they said, hey, who are you and why are you here? Right. And so now we had to go and try to say, okay, well, this is what we're trying to do. This is the goal. And then they're kind of just like, why would I be doing this? Why would I spend my time on this? Because their own direct leadership didn't really understand, right? They didn't have this, hey, this is a goal, this is a directive. And so that really having that governance in place, the right people with the right responsibilities to say, hey, yes, we need IT involved because it is software, but we also need a center. What we kind of talk about here is this, we call it a center of excellence. This is our kind of parcelized term here, but really saying, you know, these are the kind of the key people that you want to have to really direct this at scale, right? So yes, you need IT, but that's one small aspect of this, right? You need to be able to have, you know, management for the program, which usually should come from operations. And then you're realizing this is about the work, this is about the process itself, right? Not about the software. So you want to be able to have, you know, process owners, right? Who are the people who have the mandates for how to execute the work, regardless of the software, how to best execute the work. You know, they're going to need to be involved, and then representations from the site, right? Each site should have people who are, you know, representatives who are the kind of the one-stop shop that the Center of Excellence goes to talk to that facility, and everybody in that facility, particularly in the beginning, you might have questions on. So establishing
a cool question on this one. So,
yes.
so in a lot of cases, especially in the nowadays, and you know, again, like going back to McKinsey or advising firms like ours, we will always say that if possible, start small, right? Try and see what it can create on one side, on one location, maybe on one vertical, or maybe one location in general. So, do you think it is actually possible to do those experiments with technology like yours, or you kind of have to do it with scale? And if it is possible to do it on the one side with kind of like smaller team with better connectivity, less players to align with, is it possible to do it on the smaller scale? And what would be your sort of like best suggestions for the experimentation?
Yeah, so, you know, we always have those conversations and we say, hey, do we want to take like one location and digitize everything, right? Or do we want to maybe take one process and then digitize that at all locations, right? And I think the level of variability to the process can really dictate that as well. So for example, you know, we work with a customer, Philip Morris, who they wanted to do safety, a safety use case, right? It was pretty simple of, if I see a problem, I want to report it, right? And everybody, most organizations have a version of that kind of requirement, but it's, you know, it's paper, people are reporting that up, nothing really ever happens with it because it's just too disaggregated. But then, you know, what Philip Morris was able to do is say, hey, you know what, we want everybody, you know, once a week to fill out this thing. It's 5 steps, you know, 5 questions. It takes literally maybe 30 seconds to complete. And we want that across every single location. And so they executed that and they rolled that out in 4 months. It was 20,000 users. So think about, you know, trying to do anything like that in that amount of time, right? So this isn't a years long thing. This is within 4 months, I want 20,000 people following these 5 steps. And then now what that's done is that also introduces them to how the software works, right? Just the function, the flow of things. And then now you can say, okay, well, now we got everybody doing this. They know how all this works. Let's add another use case. Let's add another thing that we want to send out to. So that's a really nice one when you have like a lot less variability, right? That's 5 steps, they're going to stay the same. On this example here, you see where, okay, we want to roll this out to 3 sites, but maybe there's a little more variability to it, right? Each site maybe needs to make a little bit of a change for customer need, or, you know, just based on the geographic needs if you're out on a well. And so there's maybe a little bit of variation that each group needs to do to customize. And so you can say, well, let's take that use case or a couple of use cases and let's roll it out, like in this example here, to 3 sites, right? I think multiple sites is always maybe better than one, just because you really get a better understanding of the variances between them, right? To understand, what do I need to standardize and where do I need to allow flex? And usually a lot of sites, they want flex everywhere. And so it's hard, you got to push them to say, hey, you know, we need to standardize everywhere, but maybe there's 5% of flex. So we can take this, roll it out to those groups, understand where we're going to lock and control things and we want variability. And then from there, you can then kind of grow and say, okay, well, now let's expand that even further. Let's take that use case and say, okay, now those groups that we started with, they're kind of the champions. They understand this, and they can now also help advise along with the Center of Excellence to now push that out even further. You know, a couple of use cases at a time, so to speak. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. But then sort of like a follow-up question. So where do you think is sort of like at least, and I mean, obviously will vary it from company to company and the use case from use case, but like in your experience in general, statistically speaking, where would you have where would you have the area that produces the quickest result with adoption of those technologies? So what would you say is
I
something where
honestly,
work is successful?
Safety is probably going to be the area that is the easiest, primarily because there's such a smaller amount of variability to it, right? We talk about connected work. There's decision trees. There's the you want to capture. All of that creates more variance and more complexity to it. Any sort, and the rule of thumb I would say is anything that can truly be standardized, right? Everybody is going to operate this in the exact same way, kind of regardless. I would start with those. So in a more specific operations perspective within oil and gas, you think about interventions work out on a well site. So interventions work, right? It's kind of like maintenance, preventive maintenance, right? There was a problem on the well. We need to now pull tubing. We need to run new tubing. That process is pretty standard. So that's a great one to start with, as opposed to on the other end of the spectrum, drilling, right? Which is going to be a custom program to every single well site, right? Where the engineers are involved, based on, the rock and the field information that you're in. So, that would probably be the latter end of it. You can get there with those, but maybe that's not where you start, right? You want quick time to value, because it also helps with the change management focus of this, right? Getting people on board is going to be important. And so things that are simpler in the beginning, a little more basic, a little more controlled, there's a great place to start to get everybody kind of, understanding the process. And then you start growing towards that.
For to add on top of that, Alex, but
Yeah.
and to put the things on context, because I think the question is about speed, right? Because this is SaaS technology, this is very fast. So when Alex is talking about safety, he's saying that could set you up guys in any moment this afternoon with a safety program within Parsable, based on what we have developed for our standards startup with other customers, right? So it's very quickly for you to see, understand how the technology works, and then start when you understand how it works and how can you use it for your specific pain points. It's very easy for you to start developing those specific use cases where the company has the biggest pain points. So safety is very easy to use. It's wide case, as Alex mentioned. Everybody's going to understand it from right out of the box. But we're not talking about projects that last 6 months. We're usually, for example, with our company, what we do is we have one demonstration, a second demonstration, then we go into what we call a hands-on experience that goes for 4 weeks. And at the end of the 4 weeks, you can really have a feeling if the technology is going to work for you, in terms of easy to create all these programs, these templates that are going to help you standardize the procedures in the company, and how easy is going to be the technology adopted by the frontline workers at the company. And that only takes 4 weeks. And then after the 4 weeks, what we usually do is that we build a matrix where we have time to value, and in terms of how much value you can get, how fast you can get it. And we start identifying and working with the company specifically where we can provide the most value in the less time, right? And I completely agree with Alex. Safety is a great starting point, but I just want to put it in perspective that starting with safety, we could set you up probably in a week with a safety program within Parsable, right? So it's very, very fast to try it out. And in 4 weeks, you have a complete view if this is going to work or not for the company.
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to think when we talk about software. A lot of times, right, the perspective around like MES or SRP, or ERP is like these are years-long endeavors. And while so the way we talked about in the past, of it could be years long in terms of the iteration, right? Because this is now a new way of working. You're always improving, but the actual time to get set up and begin work and in kind of an as usual state, you're talking weeks. We're talking weeks and months, and not years. And that should be your goal with anything that I think that you're doing here, because the way people operate is different than machines, and that we need to change quickly. If it's going to take 6 months or a year to get a change into a process throughout how people work, it's not going to work for you, right? It needs to be able to change at a moment's notice. So even that safety one, we can get you up and running in a week. That talk track, that's great. Now you roll it out. It's like, hey, you know what? It'd really be nice if we can ask one more question. It's like, all right, well, are we going to take 6 months to do that, or are we take 5 minutes to do it? Hit a button, and now everybody has the most up-to-date version. So I think that type of speed is definitely something you want to keep in mind for importance.
Alex, one question from my side. How long usually take to digitize procedures for a drilling process?
So again, we talk about the speed to digitize is is in that sense is not really about the speed of digitizing. It's about the speed of just setting up the drilling process, right? So the idea would be that if you know, again, so Diego, for drilling, right, you're going to have all of your engineers together. They're going to determine, well, based on the well, where it's at or where the well is going to be, here's the program, right? And so in the speed that you would write that down, you know, so just for Parsable's example, right? So the speed that you maybe, how would you write that down now, right? Or prior to using any sort of program would be a piece of paper or going like Microsoft Word, right? Let me just write it out. And then the idea would be on your digitalization effort is you want to be able to do that same thing. But rather than writing it out in Word and then go into quote unquote digitize this, you can use a tool, use a platform that the ability for that engineer just to write it out. They do it first time in your system, and then now once you're ready, you can just edit and hit publish, and now it's ready to go, right? So the speed is not about the digitization effort; it's about just how long are you actually thinking about the process. So it's process driven and not software driven, right? That's the variable. In terms of speed, the software should not be what's slowing you up, right? You should be able to work as quickly as you can, develop and refine your processes.
Thanks.
Okay. Any other questions on that?
No, not right now.
I have a question for the audience. Regarding we review the profiles of the people that were participating in this event. Is everything it was heavily leaned to the talent management side and training and workforce management. So what are the specific pain points that you are seeing today in your organizations that you think that you could address with Connected Worker? So as soon as you have that answer, please just jump into the call.
Perfect.
So it's not just us talking, right?
Yeah, let's just give everyone a minute, and then you usually take some time to reply. So if you can just keep moving forward, and then we're gonna voice that.
Sure. Okay. All right. So now what we're gonna do, we'll talk about. So a lot of the efforts here that in the conversation has been about kind of the input into this, right? The digitalization effort, the implementation of it, doing that at scale. And now we can start talking about, okay, what do we do with that now that we have it, right? We have all this information, and we talk about iterating. How do we actually do that, and what are we looking for? Looks like some people posted in the chat. Let me post it out so I can see in case there's a
No, don't worry about it. I'll keep track of it.
Okay, all right. All right, so we talked about, a lot of times we talk about data, right? And data is useful only if it's accessible and can be used. If it's, and a lot of data that people have is just, it's not accessible, right? So it's one thing to say, hey, we did all this effort, we collected all this information, and now I've got 20,000 data points, and I don't know what to do with it, right? I don't know what location it came from. I can't really search through it very easily. And also maybe it could be even higher level as well. So when we talk about data, rather than talk about data, talk about what we call metadata, right? Which is actually much more granular in terms of tracking. And this should always be something I think that you're looking for. We talk about connected work, because this metadata is going to be how you can actually execute things at scale, because this will be allowing you to filter, to track, and to truly understand. And for anybody on the call who maybe is not as familiar with metadata, a quick way to kind of think about metadata could be, if you ever gone onto a website to search for a car, and it asks you questions of, hey, what year are you interested in? What model are you looking for? What area do you live in? And all of a sudden it pulls up the right stuff for you that you were looking for in your search, right? That allow you to then decide what you want. Metadata is the exact same thing there, right? So how does that, if you look at an ad for a particular car, how does it know that it's for that year, that model, all that? Well, it's tagged, it's tracked with it, it's associated with it. So you can filter. And of course, that example is a manual filter, right? I want to see it on a screen, but apply that, at a much more macro level. That's also that same idea, the same concept of what machines are doing. It's what business intelligence does, to say, hey, I want to analyze and understand all of this information. And in order to do that, you have to be able to track and filter and understand it. So we talked about, so metadata, there's just constant amounts of data, within these areas. And so being able to actually enforce tracking of this and ensuring that if people aren't doing, if if things aren't being tagged and you know, this is an implementation problem, right? If someone has, hey, all the set up, everything is set up for you to track it, you're just not doing it, that's an implementation issue, right? That's a management issue. Or is it a problem of, hey, the solution is not capable to do this, or it's not capable of doing it at scale? You know, sometimes you might see a lot of solutions out there that say you can go do a checklist app, right? And I can do all these checklists, and that's great. That's useful for that individual, that one person. But if I want to go roll it out to 20,000 people, how do I know who did what, where they did it, when they did it, what group they're associated with, the context of everything? A lot of systems aren't really set up to do that. And that's really where this metadata approach comes in. And that's where you're going to be able to drive value to analyze and for continuous improvement.
There is a question, Alex, about how we, a specific example where we have seen IoT working together with Parsable. I have a couple of examples.
Sure.
So I'm working with a customer in Mexico that they have been implementing an MES for a while now, over 2 years. And one of the problems that they have is that they have a high rotation in the factory. And every time that the MES is showing different errors, they don't know what to do with them, right? Because they're new in the job, they have high rotation, it's difficult to train everyone, and MES are specifically, most of them are kind of complex, right? So what we are doing with them and what they want to start doing is that now that everybody that the MES has an error or is showing an error why the production line stopped, that error is kicking off a specific job in Parsable where all the steps required to solve that error the fastest and involving the right people that knows about that specific error get involved in fixing that process. With that, they want to increase their OEE in terms of reducing non-productive time, increasing the productivity of the line. And that's a perfect combination where you have a system that is running completely automated with IoT, but then when the people needs to get involved to solve different problems, they know exactly what to do, and it's already predefined who are the right people that they need to involve to solve those issues. I don't know, Alex, if you have any other specific example on oil and gas, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so similar within oil and gas, or a specific example, we have a customer of ours who uses, you know, Parsable out on a well site to track logs that they're going to be doing, and everything that they have, you know, obviously has to be reported for, you know, governance, compliance, and requirements. And so they've said what they've now been able to do is they have like logistics management systems that are kind of automated systems to get the right equipment out on well sites. And now they've set this up where, you know, when the worker is executing, they reach a certain step based on the answers that they do, is automatically pushing to another system that's going to now dispatch and assign work to people in their logistics department, right? They do that back to a warehouse to say, hey, we need to load trucks up with X, Y, and Z, right? So that one's, you know, it's human to machine, and that it goes into another system that's now, that system is already set up to track and to task people as well. But now it's automated. It's again coordinating that effort in a way that's consistent and that's done the exact same way possible, which again is going to allow that you know, consistently doing things in the same way, right? It's going to be what really drives that lean kind of approach.
Thank you. And we do have another question from on the other channel. So every year, thousands of seasonal employees who are also deskless workers enter the workforce on a temporary basis. What is their view on that side, or suggestions for industry? So how do you actually implement your seasonal workers inside this concept?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really a lot in the same way. So when we talked earlier about you know, consumer applications, right? So when we talked about you know, Facebook and your camera and you know, other social media, right? All of that is in a format that, for the most part, everybody knows how to do, right? So I mean, you think about if you go to the App Store, you download an app. There's no one there to teach you how to use it, right? It's supposed to be intuitive, and that's because they all kind of operate, for the most part, in a similar form or similar concept, right? And so so that taking and applying a connected worker solution that emulates that is going to be really important, so that there's not this concept of I need training on the software before I can even begin. The focus is still around the process, right? The procedure that they're executing. And so now when you have seasonal workforce that comes in 3-4 months, out of the year, 6 months out of the year, that are always kind of changing, it's, hey, here's a device, here's the app, and they can get in and they get up and going, right? Either with no tutorial, or if they're, a little tricky, maybe it's a quick 5-minute, hey, FYI, here's this button, here's this button. And then it's about following the process, right? And so, and because we talked about here with setting this up in a way that is very specific and dynamic with how people should work, and also tracking what they do. For most of our customers who kind of work with seasonal workforce, this is actually really a tool that helps in that area, because now you're actually ensuring consistent performance out of everybody, kind of regardless of their background or time. And let's say worst case, if someone didn't perform in the right way, you can also see it. You have visibility into it, and at the lowest level, right? So that, so their immediate supervisor will have that visibility. The supervisor above them will also have that visibility, and so on. So now you can come in and you can actually, make the efforts to make a change for it. So I think it really is a tool in that area, assuming that you're in a way that it's, again, kind of consumer-driven concept, where there's not everybody who comes in, I got to spend 2 weeks training them on software, right? Which has probably been a lot of people's experience with software in the workplace.
So I think a follow-up question from one of the participants. So what about managing permissions for employees, contractors, right? So sometimes you need to give a different levels of access and different levels to interaction to employees or contractors.
Yeah, the more complex you get with that, right? In terms of just the dynamic, or I shouldn't say complex, the more dynamic things are, the more that you want to push out those controls and those needs out to kind of the masses, right? So if you guys, if you're running a system where it's centralized and everybody has to, to go get a permissions to have an account, right? Has to be done through IT at a different organization. It takes a long time. It's very, and maybe permissions need to change. That's too slow. It's not quick enough, right? And so when we talk about, right, a tool for the operations, this is kind of also in that area too, right? In the administrative side of this is also equally as important. So to say, like, that immediate supervisor, let's say, of that individual can create an account for them, right? Can say, hey, here's your account, and also here is the controls that I have in place for you. So talking specific to Parsable, we have, we call it access ABAC, which is attributes-based access control. Basically just means that you have a profile on your name, and that's going to determine what you're allowed to do and what you're allowed to see. And then when you get into a job, you can say, hey, you're on this job as a technician, and being a technician means you have certain things you're allowed to do in the software and certain things you can't do in the software. But that immediate supervisor also has the authority to change those for that person, right? So again, it's pushing this to be operations focused, so that in the time that maybe the people are making the decision, that's the only time factor. Again, right? It's not the software slowing things down. It's just the decisions of the people. And now it's one click away to make the change.
I have another example that complements that from the outside of the management of the technology itself. But for example, we have a customer in Peru that every time that they have a seasonal worker, they need to go through fill up a form, answer questions, and they're doing that in paper, right? And then that paper is consolidated by the administrative part, and they review the answers, and then they go into another system, and they need to check out that this person is allowed to enter the facilities, and they synchronize an access card, okay? All that process is very slow, and you have many facilities, and this all centralized in one person. So the process of getting seasonal workers is very slow, okay? It's very inefficient. So what they're looking at to do is, first of all, transform that questionnaire, right? That form that they need to fill out for people to get access to the facilities. First, do it digital. Then it's going to be centralized in different teams and the different facilities, for they can review the digital forms. And then if the form is approved directly, the integration is going to allow and synchronize with these access cards. So it's this kind of technology where you have paper, and paper makes everything inefficient, and as Alex has mentioned through the whole presentation, that reducing or eliminating paper is the first part of digitalization, can help you in many, many different areas. And one of the problems that, as George was asking, is how do you manage employees and contractors and seasonal workers, right? So when you have everything in one single place, and I have had like 3 or 4 jobs in my life, usually the first couple of months are very difficult because everything is separated, right? Not all information is in one place. And what a technology like this, a connected worker platform, can do is have everything in one single place for people to know exactly what they need to do and hit the ground running.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
And we have actually another question, maybe just being aware of time, probably the last one. So while productivity is number one with deskless workers, still keeping employees happy is critical in the sector. Honeywell keep uploading many reports about it and always alarms about this situation. So do you have any kind of data about how those solutions sort of like help employees and then help them to feel safer and all of this?
Yeah, I mean, nothing that I have on the slide here. To be honest, I didn't want to feel like I was selling you guys the entire time on Parsable. So specific to Parsable, we've done a lot, and I don't have the figure on hand here, but we've done a lot of kind of questionnaires and results back from people executing within Parsable, and within an extreme margin of people saying that, hey, doing this, they prefer it better than paper. They like the functionality better, and it makes their job easier. If people do have some curiosities about that, I can send as a follow-up a slide deck that I can find for you guys or a slide on that shows some actual numbers to that from our experience within Parsable. But also from a firsthand experience, I've seen the gamut of responses from people when we say, hey, we want to go digital, right? I've been out to a well site with someone who's been working for 30 years. And now it's, hey, we're going to do this brand new thing. And I've also, again, worked with the young guys who are just coming on. And usually the biggest challenge you might have for the seasoned veterans up front is I've never had an experience where that's continued. Because again, if this is set up well to where this is a tool to help them do their job, and they understand why, and they understand what this is going towards, I've never had anybody, really say, hey, that's a problem. I don't like what this is. Because usually people don't even realize what they do in their day-to-day jobs because of paper. It's so ingrained, it's so natural because it's all we've ever done that you don't even realize, you can't distinguish between what's process required and what's paper required, right? Even just a signature, right? A supervisor coming to check on something and signing on a piece of paper is a necessity of paper, not necessarily of the process. Right? The process is to be built in a certain way, and the paper and the signature and the person walking over to vet it is because of the limitations of paper, and people don't even recognize that. So kind of once they start down this approach, down this process, you almost have this aha moment of like, I didn't even realize, the freedom moments that you get from it because of you now can just throw away all those restrictions that paper had on you, but you didn't even know that it existed until it was gone.
And then if I can complement that, I am from Chile, really, and I manage most of my day. I deal with companies that work in Latin America, and I see that most of the people in the call are from emerging markets too. There is a huge gap in technology between the headquarters and the shop floor or the field in terms of what people use in the day-to-day to do their work. And when the company and organization goes and makes the effort to enable people digitally and put tablets and technology in their hands to do their work, like the boost that you get from your workforce is amazing. Like they feel valued, they feel that the company is investing on them. And we have seen how this program in terms of helping people to become digital, people that are 50, 60, 65 years old, close to retirement, when they are empowered with digital tools, they feel part of the organization and they feel part of that the organization is investing on them in the long run, right? So usually when you implement not just Parsable, but any kind of tool that is going to focus on frontline workers that have never worked with technology, they have been working with hammers and machines and big machines, but usually with paper. And now they also get a tablet and now they can communicate digitally. You get a huge boost from your workforce.
Perfect. Thanks so much. I think I think that's all time that we have. So Alex, Diego, I think thank you so much for giving us a very detailed presentation and just really showing kind of, and a last step I like to think about as a last step of this sort of like technology 4.0, when you not only connecting devices, when you're not only connecting, you know, surveillance, drones, satellites, but when you actually go and collect the information from your workers, and as you said, probably just putting everything together is really, really important. I think this, some of the examples that you gave previously about it, putting data together is where probably the maximum value is, but also just being able to work with your employees and really focus on the well-being of the safety and the well-being of your employees really just takes your brand to the next level. So in case we have a few participants on the line right now, but I know that a lot of them will watch it in the recordings. If they do have any questions, how would they contact you?
We can send you the information of our. They should contact me. So if you, ideally, what we would like to do is, if anyone is interested, we would like to give you a demonstration of our technology, how it works, how easy to work. So follow up with me on my email, and I will put that on the chat right now for everyone to have.
Okay. Okay. Please do.